Part 1, clauses 3 to 6. The question is that Part 1 stand part. The Honourable Mary Ann Street.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair, and I want to pick up a number of points now that relate to Part 1, in which I foreshadowed somewhat in my comments on the preamble. First of all, it is important to note, as my colleague Kelvin Davis drew attention to in his speech, that this settlement legislation is not something that has been arrived at in a vacuum, that it dates back to the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi. And so for us to take time in this House is no hardship. If we get this right, and the legislation is right, and the settlement is good and just and durable, then we perform an enormous service to the country. The settlement of Treaty of Waitangi grievances, historic grievances, the settlement of those grievances is absolutely fundamental to our forward progress as a nation. And for members opposite to roll their eyes and think that we are taking too much time over this is offensive, is simply offensive. And I would ask that they look at the bigger picture and have a look at the seriousness of some of the infringements of the Treaty of Waitangi that have occurred, and which this small bill, in its small way, is trying to redress for the people of Whanganui Iwi. And so it is worthwhile taking time and having a look at it. Mr Chairman, Part 1 consists of clauses 3, 4, 5 and 6. Clause 3 is the purpose, and the purpose of this Act is to give effect to certain provisions of the deed of on-account settlement in the Whanganui Iwi historical claims. And why are we at this point? Why is this legislation necessary? What is it that precipitated this legislation and means that we are moving it through the House, I hope, in a dignified and considered way, and not with the kind of haste that some members opposite are seeking? The fact of the matter, Mr Chairman, is that this bill is a response to breaches of the Treaty of Waitangi. It is as simple as that. There is a piece of legislation which many iwi up and down the country revile, and it is the Public Works Act, where properties were taken by previous administrations in the course of the 19th century in particular, but later as well, and pieces of land were appropriated, purloined, confiscated, stolen by the Crown under the Public Works Act. So in this legislation, we have, in the settlement of the on-account settlement of the Whanganui Iwi historical claims, there are two things cobbled together here. There are Crown forests and the Kaitoke prison. Two things put together, two sources of aggravation, of grievance and of distress for Whanganui Iwi. And here is a moment when we can correct that. In Clause 4 of Part 1, Mr Chairman, Clause 4 is simply interpretations, but frequently everything hangs on interpretations. And it is again useful to remember that this legislation doesn't sit in a vacuum. Not only does it have its historical antecedent in breaches of the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840, but it tries now to address those, and it picks up on, Mr. Chairman.
The Honourable Marianne Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It picks up on grievances that have arisen subsequently because, and I particularly want to focus on the definition of Crown forestry assets, because of what happened to that land and the land that was used for Crown forests. Mr. Chairman, in 1989, as we know, the process of the sale of Crown forests was held up by the New Zealand Māori Council, and Sir Graham Latimer, as chairman of that council, took the case all the way to the Privy Council, resulting in a piece of legislation which protected the land on which the trees stood. The land on which Crown forests stood was to be held in trust by the Crown Forestry Rental Trust for iwi, or whomever the rightful owner was determined to be, when an eventual settlement of the historical grievance under the Treaty of Waitangi was to be settled. We are settling that grievance with this legislation. The process in this one was begun under the previous government, is being continued under this minister. And both the previous minister and this one deserve to be commended for their efforts in bringing it to this pass. But it means that the Crown forestry assets that are referred to in the interpretation clause 4 is set down in the Crown Forest Assets Act of 1989. 1989 was not so long ago, and it goes to show that there were events happening even in relatively modern times which compounded grievances previously caused by Crown actions, and those grievances remain deeply felt by iwi. But here we have a settlement, and we have the restoration of part of the Whanganui, the northern part of the Whanganui forest in this settlement. So little by little, piece by piece, Crown forestry assets are being returned to iwi, and the value of their rental is being returned to iwi, or apportioned appropriately according to negotiation by the Crown and the iwi concerned. And so this is a living moment for a long-held grievance that resolves a piece of our history. It should not be rushed, it should be taken with care, and it should be scrutinised properly in these committee stages. So before the next National Party member gets up to move that the motion be now put, I ask them to consider the seriousness of what we are dealing with at this moment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.